Lily had chosen the latter option without hesitation. The moment she stormed out of that confrontation, she had gone straight to a real estate agent and begun searching for a new place to live. Lily hadn't bothered waiting for her father's input. He was usually caught between trying to keep the peace and appeasing Monica's ever-increasing ambitions. Moreover, she didn't told Edward about the ultimatum either. She knew he would try to convince her to make peace with her parents, arguing that family ties were important and that understanding and patience would bridge the gap. But Lily was done with patience. She had kept quiet about what had transpired at Ugo's wedding, how her parents' machinations nearly caused a scene. She had waited too long, more than a decade, to have Edward. Now, she couldn't risk losing him, not after they had finally been together for just a couple of weeks. No, she decided she would wait for a better time to explain everything to him. The final straw had come when her mother overheard a conversation between her and Edward one evening. Lily had been laughing, her voice light and filled with joy, as she spoke to Edward on the phone, not realizing that Monica had returned early from her women's meeting. Without warning, Monica had barged into her room, snatched the phone out of her hand, and demanded to know who she was speaking to with such intimacy. The moment she realized it was Edward, Monica exploded, her voice ringing through the house. "How can my own daughter lower herself to the level of such boy?" Monica screamed, her face flushed with anger. "What does he have to offer you? Nothing." "Mom, we love each other." Lily had tried to explain, her voice steady but pleading. "Love? Did you say love?" Monica had sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "What do you know about love?" Her whole body shook with rage, her eyes blazing as she glared at her daughter. "Answer me!" Lily took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "But Mom, Edward's mother was once your best friend. Why have you suddenly started treating them like they are Benitos? If their mom was still alive, would you be acting this way?" "Shut your mouth before I shut it for you," Monica screamed, her voice quaking with fury. "I was friends with their mother when she met my standards, but we are way past them now. Don't you ever compare them to us again. Do you know the kind of menial and dirty jobs that boy has done just to put food on their table? And you expect me to consider such a person as my son-in-law? Are you mad? After all the expensive schools and coaching I gave you, you want to throw it all away because of what? Some silly notion of love? It will not happen. Not while I am alive. Do you hear me?" Monica turned to leave, her disgust palpable, not waiting for her daughter to respond. But Lily had had enough. Her mother's words cut deep, but they also ignited a fire within her. As Monica moved to leave the room, Lily spoke, her voice low and menacing, yet full of conviction. "Have you ever considered that we could have been in Edward's shoes? How would you feel if people treated us the way you are treating them? Edward might have done dirty and menial jobs, as you call them, but they were honest and honorable. I would rather be with a man who makes his own way in the world with integrity and honor than some lazy daddy's boy. I'm so disappointed in you, Mom. You should be a better example. Mrs. Felicia would be rolling in her grave at what you have become." The words had barely left her lips when Monica turned on her heel, her face contorted with rage. In a flash, she raised her hand and slapped Lily twice across the face, the sharp sound echoing in the room. "Don't you ever in your life speak to me in that manner again," Monica hissed, her voice a deadly whisper. Lily's cheeks stung, but the pain was nothing compared to the sting of betrayal and disappointment she felt towards her mother. That confrontation had marked a turning point, the culmination of years of tension and unspoken resentment. Monica's ultimatum had only solidified Lily's resolve to carve out her own path, away from her mother's suffocating expectation. Now, as she packed her belongings, Lily felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for the fractured relationship with her mother, and relief that she was finally taking control of her own life. She glanced around her room one last time, memories of happier times flashing through her mind, and then she closed her suitcase with a determined click. It was time to move forward, to build a life on her own terms, and to fight for the love she had found in Edward. When Edward found out about Lily's latest predicament, he wasn't pleased at all. He listened carefully as she recounted the heated exchange with her mother, but instead of agreeing with her decision to move out, he surprised her with his reaction. "We need to go apologize to your mother," Edward said firmly, his voice calm but resolute. Lily blinked in disbelief. "Apologize? Edward, did you not hear what I just told you? She slapped me and then gave me an ultimatum to either marry a man of her choice or leave the house." "I heard you, Lily," Edward replied, his eyes steady on hers. "But if we are going to have a future that involves both of our families, we have to do things the right way. That means not disregarding the roles your parents play in your life, no matter how unreasonable they might seem." Lily was taken aback by Edward's stance. A mix of frustration and admiration welled up within her. She didn't like the idea of apologizing, especially when she felt she had done nothing wrong. But seeing Edward stand firm, even after hearing about her mother's plans to marry her off to another man, only deepened her respect for him. His commitment to honoring their parents, despite everything, spoke volumes about his character. But she still made an attempt to bring him to her side. "Edward, you don't understand," she said, her voice edged with frustration. She was hesitant to reveal the full extent of her mother's disdain for Edward, knowing it would only hurt him more. No matter how angry she was at her mom, she couldn't bring herself to disclose everything. There were boundaries she was unwilling to cross, both for Edward's sake and out of some lingering sense of loyalty to her mother. "I know your mom can be overreacting sometimes," Edward continued, his tone softening, "but I know what it means to not have a mother. I don't want you to lose yours while she is still alive. There is no replacing that." Lily felt her resolve start to crumble. She knew Edward was speaking from a place of personal loss, and his words cut through her anger. He had never had the chance to reconcile with his own parents. His mother had passed away, and his father had abandoned them. She couldn't deny the truth in his words. If she pushed her mother away now, there might be no coming back. Taking a deep breath, Lily nodded. "All right, Edward, we will go apologize, but I hope you are ready for whatever comes next. My mom is not an easy person to please." Edward gave her a reassuring smile. "We'll face it together. Whatever happens, we'll handle it." With a reluctant heart but a newfound determination, Lily agreed to Edward's plan. They would go to her mother, seek forgiveness, and try to gain her approval for their relationship. It wasn't going to be easy, but for Edward's sake and for the love they shared, she was willing to try. Edward and Lily decided to visit Monica the following weekend. Lily was nervous, her palms damp with sweat as they made their way to her parents' house. She knew this wouldn't be an easy conversation, but she hoped that Edward's sincerity and humility would soften her mother's stance. Monica was sitting in the living room when they arrived, her face a tight mask of disapproval. The tension in the room was palpable, a heavy cloud hanging over them as Edward and Lily stood before them. "Good evening, ma," Edward greeted politely, bowing his head slightly out of respect. "Thank you for seeing us today." Monica looked at him coldly, her eyes narrowing. "What do you want?" she asked bluntly. Edward took a deep breath and glanced at Lily, who nodded for him to continue. "I wanted to apologize for any offense I may have caused you and to seek your blessing for my relationship with Lily. I care deeply for her and I want to do things the right way, with your approval." Monica scoffed, her lips curling into a sneer. "My approval?" she repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. You think I would approve of my daughter wasting her life with someone like you? Edward's face fell slightly, but he kept his composure. I understand you have concerns, ma, but I promise you, I will always take care of Lily and like your father took care of you. Monica cut him off sharply, her eyes flashing with contempt. Don't talk to me about promises. Your father abandoned your family, left little children to fend for themselves. Who is to say you won't do the same? It's in your blood, isn't it? Lily gasped, shocked by the harshness of her mother's words. Mom, that's not fair. Edward is nothing like his father. But Monica was unrelenting. You think so? She snapped. Men like him don't change. They come from nothing, and they will always be nothing. I won't have my daughter throwing away her future on a man with no prospect, no background, and no integrity. Each word from Monica was like a dagger to Edward's heart. He felt a familiar stench of shame, a deep-rooted pain he thought he had buried long ago. His father's abandonment had always been a source of insecurity for him, a wound that never fully healed. Hearing Monica compared him to the man who had deserted him and his family reopened that wound in the cruelest way. For a moment, Edward stood there, silent, the weight of Monica's words settling over him. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but he couldn't find the words. His throat felt tight, his chest heavy with a mixture of anger and sorrow. Lily reached out to touch his arm, but Edward stepped back, his expression conflicted. I'm sorry, ma, he finally managed to say, his voice strained. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I just wanted to do right by Lily. Monica's expression didn't soften. If you truly want to do right by her, then you will leave her alone. Let her find someone who can offer her a real future, not some fate as you and your sisters. Edward nodded slowly, his heart sinking. He knew when he wasn't wanted, and it was clear that Monica would never accept him. I understand, he said quietly. Thank you for your time, ma. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the house, his shoulders heavy with the weight of her rejection. Lily watched him go, torn between staying to confront her mother and running after him. Mom, how could you say that? She demanded, tears welling up in her eyes. Edward is a good man. He's nothing like his father. Maybe so, Monica replied coldly, but he will never be good enough for you. Lily didn't bother responding. He rushed out after Edward, finding him standing by his car, staring blankly ahead. Edward, she called softly, but he didn't turn around. Maybe your mom is right, Edward said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe I'm not good enough for you, Lily. I don't want you to suffer because of me. Don't say that, Lily protested, grabbing his arm. You know that's not true. My mom doesn't know you like I do. Edward shook his head, still not looking at her. But she has a point. What if I end up like my father? What if I can't give you the life you deserve? Lily's heart broke, seeing the pain etched on his face. Edward, you are not your father. You have done so much already. Sacrificed so much for your sisters, for everyone you care about. I love you for who you are, not for what you have or don't. But Edward couldn't shake Monica's words from his mind. I need time to think, he said, his voice choked with emotion. I'm sorry, Lily. I need to be alone right now. Lily wanted to argue, to make him see that he was more than his past. But she knew he needed space. Okay, she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. But please, don't let her words destroy what we have. Edward nodded slightly before getting into his car and driving away, leaving Lily standing there, watching him go with a heavy heart. Over the next few weeks, Edward withdrew into himself, consumed by doubt and insecurity. Monica's harsh words had spoken him to his core, dredging up old fears and insecurities he thought he had buried. He began to pull back from Lily, cancelling plans and avoiding her calls, not wanting to burden her with his doubt. Lily, on the other hand, felt lost without him. She understood why she was struggling, but it hurt to see him push her away. She tried to be patient, giving him the space he asked for, but every day without him felt like an eternity. Eventually, the strain became too much. One evening, after another cancelled date, Lily decided she couldn't wait any longer. She went to Edward's apartment, determined to talk to him, to remind him that he wasn't alone. When Edward opened the door and saw her standing there, her eyes full of worry and love, he felt a rush of emotions. He knew that he has been pushing her away, but seeing her now, he realized how much he needed her. Lily, please, don't say you are not good enough for me, she interrupted, stepping inside, because that's not true. I don't care what my mom said. I love you, Edward, and I'm not going to let her words destroy us. Edward's resolve crumbled at her words. He pulled her into a tight embrace, burying his face in her hair. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry. Lily held him close, her own tears falling freely. We'll get through this together, she said softly. I'm not going anywhere, no matter what anyone says. We'll prove them wrong. We'll prove them all wrong. In that moment, Edward realized that despite the doubts and fears that Monica had stirred up, he couldn't let them dictate his life. He had already come so far, and with Lily by his side, he knew he could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they would forge their own path, defying the expectations and judgments of others, proving that love, understanding, and perseverance were stronger than any words of doubt. Emily had arrived home just in time to hear the emotional exchange between Edward and Lily. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but as she stood outside the slightly ajar door, she couldn't help but listen. Each word struck her like a blow, and she clenched her fist, her anger mounting with every passing second. Edward had always been her rock, her big brother, who had stepped into a role far beyond his years when their father abandoned him. Hearing how much Monica's cruel words had affected him and how deeply he still carried the weight of their father's betrayal, Emily felt a surge of protectiveness and fury. When Lily left that night, Emily slipped in quietly, her mind racing. She couldn't let this go. She knew she had to confront the man who had caused so much pain, the man who had disappeared from their lives without a word, leaving them to fend for themselves. The next day at the hospital, Emily went straight to the records room, her heart pounding in her chest as she searched through the files until she found the one she was looking for, Mr. Andrew Ikechukwu. She had recognized him months ago when he was admitted for heart surgery. Despite the years that had passed, his face had been unmistakable, but she had maintained her professionalism, treating him like any other patient, refusing to acknowledge the shared history between them. She had buried her emotions deep, but now everything came rushing back with a vengeance. Emily quickly scribbled down his contact number from his file and stormed out of the room. She found a quiet corner in the hospital garden, away from the prying eyes and ears of colleagues and patients, and dialed the number with trembling fingers. It rang twice before a voice on the other end answered, a voice she hadn't heard in over 2 decades, but instantly recognized. Hello. Emily's breath hitched for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. Is this Andrew Ikechukwu? She asked, her voice cold. Yes, this is me. Who is speaking? Andrew replied, sounding confused. It's Emily, she said sharply. There was a pause on the other end of the line. A stunned silence. Emily, he finally managed to say, his voice thick with disbelief. Is it really you? Yes, it is me, she snapped, her anger boiling over. Your daughter, the one you abandoned 23 years ago. Andrew was silent, his breath audible over the phone. Emily, save it. Emily interrupted, not wanting to hear whatever excuse he was about to offer. Do you have any idea what you put us through? What you put Edward through? Emily, please, let me. No! She shouted, her voice echoing across the empty garden. You don't get to explain anything to me. Do you know that Edward is still paying for your mistakes? He's still dealing with the consequences of your cowardice and your selfishness. Emily, I'm so sorry, Andrew said, his voice breaking. I have regretted it every day of my life. I wanted to come back, but I was too ashamed. Too ashamed? Emily screamed, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Ashamed doesn't feed a family. Ashamed doesn't keep the lights on or put food on the table. Ashamed doesn't raise 3 children on its own. Edward had to become a man long before he should have, all because you ran away from your responsibilities. I know I failed you all, Andrew said, his voice barely a whisper now. I know I can't make up for the past, but Edward had to do jobs no child should ever have to do just to survive. Emily continued, ignoring his attempts to speak. He sacrificed his education, his childhood, his dreams because of you. And even now, when he's finally found someone he loves, he's being judged and insulted because of you, because of what you did. There was another silence, this one longer and heavier. Emily could hear her father's labored breathing, could imagine the pain on his face, but she felt no sympathy, not anymore. Emily, I'm so sorry, Andrew finally said, his voice trembling. I wish I could change the past, but I can't. All I can do now is to beg for your forgiveness and hope that one day you, Chichi and Edward can forgive me. Forgiveness? Emily repeated, her voice hollow. Do you think forgiveness will undo all the years of struggle and pain? Do you think it will make up for everything Edward lost because of you? I know it won't, Andrew said, his voice breaking. I know I can't change what happened. But please, Emily, I want to try to make amends. I want to be there for you, for Edward. It's too late for that, Emily said, her voice icy. We don't need you anymore. We have built our lives without you, and we don't want anything from you. Emily, please. No, she cut him off. You had your chance to be a father, and you threw it away. You are just a stranger to us now. I just called so you understand the gravity of your selfishness. And with that, she hung up, her hands shaking with anger, and the stench of old wounds reopened. As she stood there, breathing heavily, Emily felt a mixture of relief and sadness. She had finally said everything she needed to say, but it didn't bring the closure she thought it would. Instead, it left her feeling emptier, the weight of her father's abandonment still heavy on her shoulders. Later that evening, she went to see Edward, who was sitting on his small balcony, staring out the city skyline. He looked up as she approached, his face wary. What's wrong? He asked, immediately sensing her distress. I called him, Emily said, simply sitting down beside him. You called who? He asked, standing up to hold her sister. She was beginning to shake. His heart lunged in his chest as fear and panic rose up inside him as Emily began to cry again. His thoughts ran every which way, trying to decode that singular statement. Who did she call, and why did that call unhinge her this way? He pondered worriedly. When Emily collected herself, she narrated how she met their dad at the hospital and what prompted her to call him after denying him at the hospital. Edward's eyes widened. You called Dad? He asked. Emily nodded, her expression hard. I couldn't take it anymore, Edward. After everything that happened, after hearing what Lily's mom said about you, I had to confront him. Edward looked down, his shoulders slumping. What did he say? He said he was sorry. Emily replied. He said he regrets leaving us, but it doesn't change anything, does it? Edward was silent for a moment, relieved that she wasn't hurt in any way. Then he shook his head. No, it doesn't. But I understand why you did it. Emily sighed, leaning back against the chair. I wish things were different. I wish we didn't have to keep carrying this weight. Edward nodded, reaching over to take her hand. I know, but we have got each other, right? And we have made it this far without him. We'll keep going. Emily squeezed his hand, grateful for his steady presence. Despite everything, she knew they would get through this. Please don't tell Chichi about this, Edward said after a brief silence. Of course, Emily exclaimed. She must not find out. With this mutual agreement, they stayed together, holding each other as their minds tried to heal from the pain of the past. Edward's day had been going smoothly until his secretary announced that a man named Andrew Ikechukwu was in the lobby asking to see him. Edward's heart sank. The man who had abandoned him, Emily and Chichi, all those years ago. The same man who had recently tried to apologize through Emily, only to be coldly rejected. Edward felt a surge of anger, but he also felt a deep sense of resignation. What more could he possibly want now? Send him in, Edward said, sitting up straighter in his chair. When Andrew walked into Edward's office, he looked older than Edward remembered from his childhood. His hair was mostly grey, and his face was lined with deep wrinkles. There was a hesitant, almost apologetic look in his eyes, a stark contrast to the stern, authoritative father Edward remembered from his youth. Edward, Andrew began, his voice trembling slightly. Thank you for seeing me. I know I don't deserve it, but I wanted to come here and speak to you face to face. I need you to understand why I left, why I stayed away. Edward listened, his face expressionless. He had waited over 2 decades for an explanation. But now it was here. He found that he didn't really care anymore. Andrew continued, his voice wavering as he spoke. I made a mistake. One of many I know. But back then, I thought I was doing what was best for everyone. I was young, scared, and well, I was wrong. After I left, I wanted to come back so many times, but every time I tried, the shame was too much. I knew I had failed as a father, and I couldn't face you or your sister. I thought you were better off without me. Edward's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. He wanted his father to finish, to say whatever he had come to say. I have regretted it every day, Andrew went on, his voice breaking. I have seen how much pain my actions cost you and your sisters, and I know I can't change the past. But I want to try to make amends now. I want to be part of your lives again, if you will let me. Edmund looked at his father, feeling a mixture of anger and pity. Are you finished? He asked, his tone cold. Andrew's face fell. I guess I am, he said quietly. Then please, leave my office. Edward said firmly, I have nothing more to say to you. Andrew's shoulders slumped as he realized that his son was not ready to forgive him. He nodded, swallowing hard as he turned to leave the office. As he walked out, he felt the weight of his guilt heavier than ever. He had hoped for a different outcome, but he knew that reconciliation would not come easily, if at all. Lost in the thought, as he walked down the hallway, Andrew didn't notice Lily coming up from the opposite direction. They collided, Lily's purse falling to the ground with a clutter. Oh, I'm so sorry, Lily exclaimed, bending down to pick up her purse. She looked up at Andrew and her face registered surprise when she saw the look of recognition in his eyes. You must be Lily, Andrew said softly, a small smile appearing on his lips. Lily looked confused. Yes, I am. Do I know you? I am Andrew Ikechukwu. he replied, holding out his hand. Edward's father. Lily's eyes widened in shock, recognizing him now. She shook his hand cautiously, unsure of what to say. I I didn't expect to meet you here, she stammered. Andrew nodded, a sad smile on his face. I came to speak with Edward, to try and explain myself, but I didn't think he's ready to hear me out just yet. Lily could see the pain in Andrew's eyes, and despite everything, she felt a pang of sympathy for him and made a spontaneous decision, praying that Edward would forgive her if he found out. Mr. Ikechukwu, she said gently, I know this is difficult for you and for Edward. He's been through a lot because of what happened. But if you really want to make things right, maybe there is something you can do to help. Andrew looked at her, hope flickering in his eyes. What do you mean? Lily hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. Let's go somewhere else, she said after looking around. She sent a message to Edward, cancelling their lunch date but promised him dinner, citing work as an excuse. Edward had accepted, telling her to take it easy. She felt guilty for lying to him, but she felt what she was doing was worth it. They were now at a cafe, and she wasted no time in getting to the point. Edward and I are in a relationship, but we are having some trouble with my parents. They don't approve of our relationship, partly because of your past. They see you as an irresponsible man who abandoned his family, and they think Edward might do the same. If you want to salvage your relationship with Edward, maybe you could start by showing my parents that you have changed, that you are not the same person you were all those years ago. Andrew listened intently, nodding as she spoke. I understand, he said slowly. I want to do whatever I can to help. How can I approach your parents? Lily thought for a moment. That is left for you to figure out. I only want to salvage whatever I can. You are the adult, so please prove it. Andrew nodded, feeling a sense of determination he hadn't felt in years. Thank you, he said sincerely. I will do that, and I will do whatever it takes to prove to you, Edward and your parents, that I'm not the man I used to be. Over the next few days, Andrew stayed back in his hotel room, thinking of the best way to approach the matter. He was sad that his son was paying for something he had no hand in, and angry that anyone would make his children suffer as though they had no one. But he had no right to feel both emotions because he caused them. So in the end, he decided to approach Mr. and Mrs. Madu humbly and amicably. He first met with Mr. Madu, who minced no words in telling him how disappointed and angry he was with him. But Andrew was patient and admitted to his past mistakes, his regret, and his desire to make things right with his children. He explained how he had learned from his past and has spent years trying to atone for his mistakes, even if from a distance. He didn't shy away from his fault, but instead embraced them, showing his growth and transformation over the years, pleading that his child should not pay for his own errors. For a few days, Mr. Madu thought about his conversation with Mr. Andrew, trying to decide what the best course of action would be, especially on the side of his wife. He had always admired the zeal and tenacity of Edward, and if he was interested in his daughter, he wouldn't mind. But he needed to carry his wife along if he wanted to drink water peacefully in his house again. He just didn't understand her obsession with status and class. After all, he started humbly, as did she. After pondering on it, one evening, Mr. Madu called Edward and asked him to bring Andrew for a meeting. Edward was hesitant, unsure of what his father might have said to sway them, but Lily encouraged him to go. Just hear them out, she urged. It could be a step towards healing for all of us. When Edward and Andrew arrived at the Madu residence, they were greeted with a tense but polite reception. Mr. Madu invited them into the living room, where Mrs. Madu sat with a stern expression. I have thought deeply about our discussion, Mr. Madu began, addressing Andrew. We appreciate your honesty and the courage it took to face your past. It's clear you have changed and that you are trying to make amends, but actions speak louder than words, Mr. Ikechukwu. Andrew nodded solemnly. I understand. I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to show you that I have changed, that my children deserve a fair chance. Mrs. Madu, who had remained silent up to this point, finally spoke. You have to understand our concern, Mr. Ikechukwu. We have worked hard to give Lily the best, and we want her to be with someone who has stability and integrity. Your past actions have cast a long shadow, and we are worried that Edward might follow in your footsteps. Andrew's face softened with understanding. I can't undo the past, and I can't change what happened, but I can promise you that Edward is nothing like me. He's a good man, honest, hardworking, and filled with integrity. He's become the man I always wished I could be. Please, don't judge him by my mistakes. Give him the chance to prove himself on his own merit. Mr. and Mrs. Madu exchanged a look, and after a moment of silence, Mr. Madu nodded. We'll give Edward that chance, he said slowly. But understand this, Andrew. This isn't just about you making amends with your children. If you are serious about repairing the damage you have done, you need to show us, all of us, that you mean it. Andrew nodded, tears of gratitude in his eyes. Thank you, he said earnestly. I will. I will do whatever it takes to earn your trust and to make things right. Over the following weeks, Andrew worked hard to demonstrate his commitment to his promise, and he made a conscious effort to be present for Edward and his sisters, even though Chichi never wanted to have anything to do with him. He persisted, showing them in every way he could that he was there to stay. For Edward, it was a slow process to rebuild trust with his father, but seeing Andrew's effort to change his life and restore his family's dignity began to chip away at the walls he had built around his heart. And though it would take time, Edward realized that maybe, just maybe, there would be a future where he and his father could start to heal. Over the next few months, a tentative peace began to settle over Edward's life. His father Andrew continued to make amends, showing up for Edward and Emily in small but meaningful ways. He attended their community events, quietly cheered from the sidelines, and offered his support without demanding anything in return. Emily, ever the skeptic, remained distant at first, but she couldn't deny that their father seemed genuinely remorseful and dedicated to making things right. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden hue over the city, Edward and Lily sat together on a park bench, watching children play in the nearby playground. Edward had been quieter than usual, his thoughts distant. Lily noticed the furrowed lines on his forehead and placed a gentle hand on his. What's on your mind? She asked softly. Edward sighed, running a hand through his hair. Just everything, he admitted. My father, our future, the way things had changed so much in such a short time. Lily nodded, understanding. Your father has really been trying, she said gently. I know it's hard to trust him after everything, but maybe he deserves a second chance, for your sake, if not his. Edward looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and uncertainty. Do you think people can really change, Lily? She smiled. I think if someone is willing to put in the effort, if they are truly remorseful, then yes, they can change. But it's not easy. It takes time, patience, and forgiveness, not just from others, but from themselves. Edward nodded slowly, taking in her words. I want to believe that. I want to believe he can change. And maybe I can find it in me to forgive him someday. Lily squeezed his hand. That's a start, Edward. Forgiveness is more for you than for him. It's about letting go of the hurt so you can move forward, with or without him. Edward smiled faintly. You always know what to say, don't you? Lily grinned. It's a gift, she teased, leaning in to kiss him softly on the cheek. As they sat there in the comfortable silence, watching the world go by, Edward felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. For the first time in a long time, he he felt a sense of peace. He knew there was still a long road ahead, both with his father and with Lily's parents, but he was ready to face it. A few weeks later, Andrew invited Edward and his sisters to a small family dinner. Chichi bluntly refused to go, angry at her siblings for even thinking of going. Emily was hesitant but decided to go, encouraged by Edward's cautious optimism. When they arrived, they found a simple meal prepared, just like their mother used to make when they were children. Andrew had clearly gone out of his way to recreate a piece of their past, a gesture that wasn't lost on either of them. Throughout the evening, Andrew spoke openly about his regrets and his hopes for the future. He didn't ask for forgiveness, but instead expressed his desires to be a better man, to be someone they could be proud of. Emily listened, her heart softening despite herself. She could see how much her father was struggling to bridge the gap he had created. And for the first time, she allowed herself to see him as a flawed human being rather than just the man who had abandoned them. By the end of the night, as they were preparing to leave, Andrew pulled Edward aside. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "It means more to me than you will ever know." Edward nodded, his expression unreadable. "It's a start," he replied, "but there is still a long way to go." Andrew smiled faintly, his eyes filled with hope. "I am ready for that journey, however it takes." As the months passed, Andrew continued to work tirelessly to rebuild his relationship with his children and earn the respect of the Mado family. His effort didn't go unnoticed, and slowly but surely, he began to regain their trust. Edward and Lily's relationship also began to flourish under the new sense of peace. They found themselves more connected, more understanding of each other's struggles and dreams. But there still remained the issue of Chichi. She had always been the most outspoken among the siblings. After Andrew abandoned the family, she was too young to fully understand what was happening. But as she grew older, she felt the impact of his absence deeply. Unlike Emily and Edward, who had cautiously allowed Andrew back into their lives, Chichi remained firmly against any reconciliation. Every time Andrew attempted to reach out to her, Chichi responded with cold rejection. She had no interest in his apologies or explanations. To her, he was a man who had made a choice to abandon his family and had no place in their lives anymore. One evening, as Chichi was leaving her architecture firm after a long day, she spotted Andrew waiting by the car. Her face darkened as she approached him. "What are you doing here?" she snapped, her voice cold and unyielding. Andrew, visibly nervous, took a deep breath. "Chichi, I just want to talk. I know I haven't earned your forgiveness, but you are right." Chichi interrupted sharply. "You haven't. You think just showing up and playing the regretful father will erase everything you have done? Do you know how hard Edward had to work to keep us together? Do you know the sacrifices he made?" Andrew's shoulders slumped. "I know, and I am so sorry. I made terrible choices, and I regret them every day." Chichi laughed bitterly. "Regret? You think regret will fix this? You abandoned us for some woman, and now you expect us to just forget?" Andrew lowered his gaze, his voice barely a whisper. "She's gone, Chichi. The woman I left with. She passed away 2 years ago. It wasn't what I thought it would be. She was controlling, manipulative. I was too ashamed to come back after everything." Chichi blinked, taken aback by his honesty but not softened. "So, you are only here because she's gone? Because you have nothing else?" Andrew shook his head. "No, I'm here because I realized too late what I lost. Not just because of her death, but because I threw away the most important people in my life, my family." Chichi glared at him, her anger only deepening. "You still don't get it, do you? You think a few words can make up for years of pain? Just leave us alone, Andrew. We don't need you." She turned and walked away, but Andrew grabbed his chest suddenly, his face contorted in pain. He collapsed onto the ground, clutching his heart. Chichi turned back, her eyes widening in horror. "Help! Someone help!" she screamed, rushing to his side, all her anger replaced by panic. Andrew was rushed to the hospital, the very place where Emily worked. When she heard what had happened, she immediately informed Edward, who dropped everything to be at his father's side. Chichi, though still angry, was filled with guilt and fear. She hadn't wanted this, not like this. The three siblings waited anxiously as the doctors worked on their father. When Emily finally emerged from the operating room, her face was a mixture of exhaustion and worry. "He's stable now," she said quietly, "but it was a close call. He's going to need time to recover." Chichi sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands. "This is all my fault," she muttered, tears streaming down her face. Edward placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "No, Chichi, it's not your fault. He's been under a lot of stress, and his heart isn't as strong as it used to be. He should have taken better care of himself." Emily nodded. "But maybe this is a sign that we need to make peace with him. If not for his sake, then for ours. We can't carry this anger and pain forever." Chichi looked up, her eyes red and puffy. "I don't know if I can forgive him," she whispered. Edward sighed. "Forgiveness isn't about him, Chichi. It's about us. Letting go of the pain so we can move forward." After Andrew was moved to a recovery room, the siblings took turns visiting him. When it was Chichi's turn, she hesitated at the door, unsure if she could face him. But seeing him lying there, frail and vulnerable, stirred something in her heart. She sat beside his bed, her hands trembling slightly. "Why did you do it?" she asked softly. "Why did you leave us?" Andrew opened his eyes, his gaze weak but earnest. "I was a coward, Chichi. I thought I was missing out on something better, and I was too selfish to see what I already had. By the time I realized my mistake, I was too ashamed to come back. I thought you all would be better off without me." Chichi sniffled, wiping her tears away. "We weren't better off without you. We needed you." Andrew reached out, his hand trembling. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I'm trying to make things right, but I know it might be too late." Chichi hesitated for a moment before taking his hand. "It's not too late, but it's going to take time. I need time to stop being angry and disappointed." Andrew nodded, tears in his eyes. "I will take whatever time you are willing to give." After his recovery, Andrew continued his efforts to make amends, not just with his children but also with those he had wronged indirectly. He knew that Lily's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Madu, were a significant hurdle in Edward and Lily's relationship, and he was determined to help. Eventually, Mr. and Mrs. Madu invited Andrew, Edward, and Lily to their home for dinner. It was a tense evening at first, but as Andrew spoke about his journey, his regrets, and his hopes for the future, Monica began to see him in a new light. She still had her own reservations, but she couldn't deny the sincerity in his voice. By the end of the night, Monica looked at Edward and Lily and said, "I still have my doubts, but if you two are determined to be together, then perhaps it's time I let go of my own fears. Just promise me you will take care of each other." Edward and Lily, relieved and overjoyed, promised to do just that. They knew there were still challenges ahead, but with their families slowly coming together, they felt more hopeful than ever. Andrew, standing beside his son, felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He knew he still had a long way to go to fully earn their trust, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path. As the evening ended, Chichi, who had been quietly observing, finally stepped forward. She looked at her father, her expression softening. Maybe we can start over," she said quietly. Andrew smiled, tears in his eyes. "Thank you." And with that, a new chapter began for the family, one of healing, forgiveness, and the hope of building a future where love and understanding could bridge even the deepest of wounds. Eventually, Edward took a bold step and proposed to Lily, asking her to be his partner not just in love but in life. Lily, with tears of joy in her eyes, accepted, knowing that they had both fought hard for this moment and that their future together would be bright and full of promise. Their wedding was a small, intimate affair, attended by close friends and families. Emily stood by Edward's side as his best woman, while Andrew watched from the audience, tears of pride and happiness streaming down his face. He knew he still had much to atone for, but seeing his son standing there, radiating joy, he felt that perhaps, just perhaps, he was on the right path to redemption. As Edward and Lily exchanged vows, promising to stand by each other through thick and thin, they knew that their love had been forged in the fire of adversity. They had faced obstacles that could have torn them apart, but had instead made them stronger. And as they kissed, sealing their commitment to each other, they felt a sense of peace and hope for the future. And so, with their families beginning to heal and their own hearts full of love, Edward and Lily stepped into their new life together, ready to face whatever challenges came their way, hand in hand, with the knowledge that they were stronger together than they had ever been apart. This story teaches us that love, forgiveness, and hard work are very important. Edward took care of his sisters, Emily and Chichi, even when life was very hard. He never gave up because he loved them so much. His father made mistakes and left them, but later he tried to make things right. It was hard for Edward and his sisters to forgive their father, but they learned that forgiving can help heal the heart. Lily and Edward showed that true love can overcome problems, especially when people support each other. The story also shows that everyone makes mistakes, but it's never too late to say sorry and try to do better. By forgiving each other and working together, the family became stronger and happier. This story reminds us that being kind, understanding, and forgiving can bring peace and happiness to our lives. Thank you for watching this amazing story about Edward and his sisters on African Stories. If you liked it and felt inspired with their journey, please show your support by clicking the like button, sharing with your friends, and leaving a comment below. To see more interesting stories and learn about different cultures, subscribe to African Stories and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support means a lot and helps us bring more stories to you. Until we meet again, stay connected, stay inspired, and keep smiling.